Thanks a lot for showing up. I know that you came for the food. I'm really happy to see a full room. It seems completely absurd to introduce Bill Petrocelli in his own house, also considering that part of the audience is his extended family. As you all know, for the last 30 years, he has been the co-owner with his wife Elaine of this beloved book passage where we gather today to celebrate his first novel. Bill is a lawyer, but don't hold it against him. Deep inside, he's a good guy. He obtained his undergraduate degree and his law degree at the University of California in Berkeley for a total cost of $630. Today, it costs around $100,000. This is progress. Bill spent a few years as Deputy Attorney General for the state of California and then as a poverty lawyer in Oakland before going into private practice. His heart and his mind are in social activism and books, also in music. He plays the piano and sings like Sinatra, almost. Also, please check the blog where he comments about current issues that concern us all. It's very entertaining. But to me, one of the most outstanding traits of this Renaissance man is that he is as much of a radical feminist as Gloria Steinem. His novel, The Circle of 13, is a futuristic feminist thriller, a page-turner of a book that starts with a terrible scene of domestic violence in 2012, in which a small boy, hiding in a closet, hears his father, who has returned crazed from the war in Iraq, threaten his mother. 3 gunshots, 3 dead people. What will become of this little boy? How does this relate to the killing of 13 peace activists that shakes the world 4 decades later? Or how does it relate to an explosion 60 years later in the United States building in New York? The story unfolds around these events and around Julia Morrow's investigation. Julia is the smart and brave security director who has to prevent another terrorist attack. In the process, she will discover dark secrets of her own past. Tonight, we will hear the author read for 8 or 10 minutes from The Circle of 13. I told you not to read too long because that's awful. Yeah, we have had authors here that read for an hour and a half. You hate them. Why would you buy the book if he's reading it? Especially a thriller. We have had crime mystery writers who read the last chapter. That's how smart they are. After he reads, we will have an informal conversation, and then we will open for questions from the audience. And finally, we will eat and drink to our heart's content while poor Bill signs many books. So please welcome Bill Petrocelli.
What an introduction. Thank you very much. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I can't stand it. I've been up here many times before introducing other authors, working on discussions, but not for my own book. And this makes all the difference in the world. Thank you so much. Isabel and I were just for the last hour on a Facebook page doing a question and answer thing with people. I mean, 99 questions for Isabel, 100. I like that. The trend was good, and I think it's going. Susan, I think it said that it's going to be up later on if you want to join in that discussion. Don't ask me how to do it. Susan Katzer helped us organize it. Thank you so much. I mean, I see a lot of friends and family and everyone else out here in the audience. Yeah, it's just very thrilling for me. Elaine said I've been working on this for 5 years. That's what I've been telling people, but I realized about 1.5 years ago I told somebody I was working on it for 5 years, and I began to wonder exactly how many years I was working on it. All I know is that when I first put the first sentence down on paper, George Bush was still president. So gives you some idea what it is. I'm going to read a brief scene. Isabel gave a very nice synopsis of the book, so I don't have to say too much. The scene I'm going to read begins on page 41 of the book, and it's told through the narrative voice of Julia Morrow, the main character in the novel. The setting is in her home in Tarrytown on the Hudson River, just north of New York City, and the year is 2082. In the previous scene, we learned that Julia is the security director for the new United Nations. That scene took place at the opening ceremony of the new UN building and the dedication of a statue that commemorated the lives of the 13 women, the women referred to in the title of the book. And at that event, a major act of terrorism occurs. The scene I'm going to read is actually set 15 days before those events, so that the reader knows that the terrorism is going to occur, but the characters don't. And the danger is still just a threat on the horizon. And as you will tell from the way I'm reading it, that the meeting takes advantage of some technology at the time, so it's mostly in the form of a hologramic meeting. Madeline and the others had gradually disappeared from the room. The meeting was over. And as the holographic images fade out, I heard Madeline say, "Julia, we'll talk in the morning." I was left sitting alone in the familiar surroundings of my home office. Sunday afternoon meetings were rare, and this one had been blessedly short. Toki, my house robot, a stickler for efficiency, was back at work tidying things up. Earlier he had slipped around the room, organizing the desk, darkening the windows, arranging the equipment and activating the camera to let everyone appear in lifelike form. He monitored the gaze detection lines of the participants and checked the quality of the holographic images while the meeting was in progress. Now he reversed the process, putting things away, adjusting the lamps and lightening the tone of the window to let daylight filter in from the garden. I decided to push the button that coiled back the glass on the window, allowing it to open and bring the afternoon breeze into the room. Toki would have done that for me, but sometimes I like to show him I was still in control. The meeting hadn't accomplished much. Madeline just needed to talk. With the May 4th opening of the new headquarters just 2 weeks away, she was nervous but unwilling to admit it. The increasing number of Patria slogans on walls around the city was making everyone jumpy. There have been warnings in the last few days, all of them anonymous, none of them specific. In fact, our technical team had concluded they were all replicant generated from some untraceable source. But it was the bomb the night before in Union Square that had everyone on edge. Vidcasts in the city and the rest of the world were now chasing that story. Avram Charette, my deputy director, passed around a video memorandum from the NYPD. According to the VidMem, the bomb had been set to go off at 9 p.m., when it would have caused maximum damage. But for some reason, it had gone off in the middle of the night at 3:14 a.m. Avram thought it might have been the work of amateurs. I looked at Madeline to see if that news made her any more comfortable. It didn't. Even the rounding effect of holographic imagery couldn't hide the concern on her face. The breeze from the garden finally enticed me outside. Danya was already out in the community garden talking to Moisey, the retired man who lived across from us. He'd been there all morning working on a job he had assigned to himself, adjusting the catch basins for the community rainwater system. The weather authority was promising a moderate storm for the next day, and he didn't want to miss a drop of it. At the moment, they were standing near a row of vegetables outside our window, where Danya was helping him prop up a large trellis. They weren't having much success. Moisey's partner, Selva, who had been working in the fruit garden across the pathway, came over to help. The three of them started laughing as they tried to get the trellis in position, only to have it collapse on top of them. The scene was oddly comforting. I learned to appreciate plants from my grandmother, Maya. She probably smiled when she heard me say that, because we both knew I spent most of my childhood years trying to resist learning anything. I had my own worries as a kid, and I didn't want to listen to her or anyone else. But things change. In my case, they seem to have changed after I met Danya, maybe because I met Danya. Now I find myself enjoying my time in the community garden, edging closer to the feeling that Maya probably had during those years when I was growing up in Northern California. Age has slowed Maya down. She's too old now to take care of our garden in the old co-housing community. But in my fondest memory, she's still down on her knees, turning over the soil, scraping around the edges of the fruit and vegetable plants, treating them like old friends. Like millions of others in those years, she tried to help the plants sustain themselves with less water, fewer nutrients, and less of their natural soil support. She learned to divert, cajole, and sometimes just outsmart the invading pests and creatures that had been forced north because of the mismanagement of the climate. She had a special shelf in our apartment where she saved the natural seeds that the plants produced, hiding them like they were jewels. Years earlier, she had convinced herself that the crime bosses who ran the agribusiness cartel were probably planning to seize all of those seeds so they could coerce everyone into using their own pale, anemic hybrids. The debasement of the food supply was high on Maya's list of unforgivable sins. She wasn't going to let me or the other children in our co-housing community forget it. She'd walk me through the garden and grab some lettuce and carrots and put them in my hands. Think about where these came from, she'd say. It takes sunlight, it takes seeds, it takes insects, it takes water, and it takes uncontaminated land. But mostly it takes people like you and your friends to understand how precious this is. It's easy to see why she felt so strongly about it. She grew up in a generation that almost lost everything. It's hard for someone like me, born in 2043, to feel the impact that the 20s and 30s had on Maya and her contemporaries. The concentration of wealth, which had been building for decades, had left record numbers of people unemployed and teetered on the edge of poverty. But it was the environmental disasters of those years that shaped their lives more than anything else. Everything came down to food. The climate change and the resulting crop failures caused a sharp drop in agricultural production worldwide. The food scarcity led to contamination and foodborne diseases that hit close to home. But Maya saved her greatest anger for the predators, the human predators, the unscrupulous men who tried to profit from the crisis. As the food situation got worse, a syndicate of criminal money and hidden private wealth began to flex its muscles. The Uniworld cartel moved in to take over most of the world's food distribution system. By then, Maya and the others in her generation knew they were in for a long fight. Okay, get the civil division. I got to get my mic, okay. I'll put up my mic, thanks.
I was supposed to bring some big cushions so that you would see me. So, but you can hear me. Well, Phil, let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
We should talk about the circle in your book. Because instead of the usual brotherhood of heroes, the Knights of the Round Table, or SEAL Team 6 or whatever, here we have brave and courageous women who have the Round Table.
Band of sisters, rather.
The band of sisters. So let's talk about that.
Well, I'm not sure I set out to write it that way. I just sort of evolved into it as I was doing the book. I realized that one of the things I wanted to stress in the story was the way in which women sometimes operate when they're taking control of a situation and not feeling like they're have to report to men. I've seen many women do this over the years. I've seen you and Elaine do it, for heaven's sake. And I wanted to kind of express that. And that sort of evolved into a group of women that became sort of the central characters, at least in the backstory.
Yes, but all along the book, the main characters, the strong characters are women. And women marry women, women have children with women handle the job with men as subordinates. But also, there is a sense of gender equality and diversity in the book, and it's very interesting.
Well, that was the impetus for the book. I mean, I felt that that we're living through a major historical change, maybe over the last 100 years, in which women have achieved, or starting to achieve, more equality in society. And to me, it's about maybe a 200-year process, and I feel like we're just in the middle of it. That's one of the reasons I set the book in the future, because I wanted to get a little more perspective on this and try and write a story that wasn't just totally focused on present-day issues. And I don't think it's unfair to men. I don't think the book is unfair to men. There are a lot of strong male characters in the book, but I kind of deliberately set out to have a book in which the women were not subordinate characters.
Well, we're very grateful for that. The few women in the room. You have an uncanny prophetic eye for certain things. In 1980, you wrote about the invasion of privacy, the eye of the big brother. Long before, I mean, I know it was on the wake of Nixon, but it was long before the internet and the technology, and long before people in this country felt spied.
And nobody paid any attention to me at all.
Absolutely not, because it was like what is he talking about? And then you wrote another book about sexual harassment in the workplace before Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas. And again, Elaine was telling me that people said, what did you say? Harassment? What's that? And well, if they don't like it, they can quit the job. What's the problem? So in this book, there are several issues that I hope are not prophetic. But the story is placed in 2082. And how did you imagine a world in 60 years?
You know, that's a problem. And as I was writing it, and I had to decide how to describe the world, I kept thinking, what would I have thought of our present day 40 or 50 years ago? And I tried to think what I could predict and what I couldn't. I never would have predicted the internet or anything like that. On the other hand, I think we're still flying around the same jet planes that we were 40 years ago. So what I realized is
that's not for lack of technology.
Well,
That's because American Airlines.
But I think that things change over a period of several decades, but they change unevenly. A lot of things change profoundly, but other things are pretty much the way they were before. And I think human nature doesn't change, and the relationships between people change much more gradually. It's one of the reasons I wanted to write in the future about the change in gender relations. And let me say that even though I set out to write a book that was focused on the gender relations and the changes in it, history doesn't travel in little packets like that. I mean, I couldn't write that kind of a book without writing about environmental degradation and writing about economic stagnation and all the other issues that we're plagued with.
But when you were planning the book, what was your first idea? What were you going to write about?
That's assuming I was planning. It kind of yeah, I think it was mostly what I said it was, and that is to try and focus on changes in gender relations. But as I started writing, I realized every other issue played into it, and you just can't isolate them. But it was a challenge. It's fun to write in the future. I think if you write in the distant future, 200 years from now, people would, they don't worry about the connection between now and then. They just sort of accept that world as a separate world. If I were to write something 3 or 4 years in the future, people would immediately want to know, who wins the next election and what's the next iPhone look like or something like that. So I tried to set it at a point that was close enough that it would be relevant,
so it would be,
but far enough away that I could get away from the day-to-day issues. I mean, some of the characters, if they were real characters, they would be alive today.
Yeah, Milo could be alive.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, that the idea that if it's too far in the future, it's easier, and if it's too close, it's too difficult. So
right.
There's a time like in between.
I didn't realize that as I started writing the book. They just, as I went along, I started thinking, oh my God, am I going to have to explain that too? And I thought, no, I'll figure out a way to finesse that.
But because it's not so
focus
far,
on the issues I wanted.
It's not so far in the future. The references are there for all of us,
right.
So you don't need to explain every single thing.
No, hopefully not.
Yeah. I have written historical fiction, and I know how daunting the research can be, but it is absolutely necessary to recreate the past. Now, in a futuristic novel, I assume that the task is to imagine a possible future.
Right.
How can you research for that? And how can you avoid a clutter of facts that would interfere with the flow of the narrative?
I don't have a definitive answer for that. What I learned, and this was on the job training for me. I had never done anything like this before. All I can say is I kept trying to focus back on the character and to ask myself, how is this viewed from the point of view of the character? And what I wanted to avoid was sort of these, what's it called, a deadly data dump that writers keep talking about, where you say, okay, now here's what happened. And there's just this long couple of paragraphs of bringing you up to date of what the world situation is. And I thought that's just deadly to any novel. So in order to do that, I tried to pass on that information through the eyes of the character, talking how like the character would feel at that point in time. It's a little bit of a challenge, but if you focus on that, I think it works.
Yeah, because you for example, explain these holographic conferences in which people appear and they are three-dimensional and everything. And you don't explain it very much, you just mention it. And we have to imagine how that is. And I think that's great.
I couldn't explain it because I don't know it any better than you. But I honestly think that's the kind of technology that we will see in a few years, where it's
cool, yeah.
and house robots and things like that, I think will become common. But I'll tell you a couple of little secrets, which may be obvious if they're reading the book. I never have anyone driving in an automobile in the book because I don't have a clue what a car 40 years from now will look like. And I wasn't about to guess, or whether there will be one. I tried to focus on the technology that was important to the story and to a couple of things that I thought were probably going to be likely to happen. Things I have one scene where there's something a little bit...
There's a motorcycle.
Well, yeah, there are motorcycles, this is true. But I have one scene where there's social networks being projected up on the wall, where people are using their devices to project messages on passing walls as they go by. No, but it's, I think that's going to be, probably will happen. People will, they don't want to confine themselves to the device they have in their hand, why not broadcast it to the world? I think that kind of thing was likely to occur, so I just threw it in there.
There are several themes in the novel. Some of them are really dark, like, of course, climate change, terrorism, hunger, corruption, misogyny, many of the things that we are seeing today. But there are also some very hopeful things. You present a world that is interconnected and very diverse, where women really are empowered and they play a very important role. Realistically, what do you think the future will look like? What's your vision of the future? Let's not say 70 more years, but in the next 40 years.
The vision in the book, I don't know whether that's the same as my vision outside the book.
Not necessarily.
But the vision in the book is sort of pessimistic in the short run and optimistic in the long run. In the decades the parts of the story that are set in the 30s are bleak. I mean, this is a period of where I think, and I think it's true, that the way present trends are going, the environmental catastrophes will just get worse. By the time you reach later in the story, things are working better, and for the life of me, I don't know how that happens. If I did, I wouldn't keep it a secret, but I just somehow have enough of an optimist that I think that we'll probably work out how to deal with these issues later on. But I certainly don't see a short-term answer.
Do you think that peace is possible? In the book, the United Nations plays a very important role that today, unfortunately, it doesn't. There is a character in the book that labels the United Nations efforts as effeminate. And I thought it was really interesting because it is true, it's been accused of being, they don't use the word effeminate, but they think it's not macho enough. And what is the role of peace and the role of United Nations?
About halfway through the story, the whole issue that the 13 women start focusing on is strengthening the United Nations. And I try to kind of hint at some of the changes that later on occur in the book, which would make it into a much more of a functioning institution. Right now, it's not particularly functional, but I have hopes. And I think that I really do think that unless a reconstituted United Nations can assert itself at some point, we're just doomed to keep repeating the same cycle of wars.
In the book, there is powerful, brutal, corrupt men that control the economy. They don't belong anywhere, but they own the world. They don't know each other. They never meet. They are connected electronically only, but they know whom to bribe and whom to kill. And I think that in a way, it's a projection of what's happening today, with the power concentrating in a few hands, people who don't belong in any nation, who don't have allegiance to anything, and who are totally immoral, if not immoral.
It's true. As I was writing this thing, trying to figure out what a group of bad guys would look like, it occurred to me that they don't even have to know each other. They don't have to meet. All you need is for someone to organize a way that all the dark money in the world is controlled and applied in the same direction at one time. And it becomes relatively easy to control things. I think we've created a system where international finance, if it falls into the wrong hands, can easily be directed in a way that would not have been possible a few years ago. That's scary.
And you think the technology makes it possible, more possible?
It does, yeah. And hopefully the technology will evolve to solve the problem too. But in the short term, I think it's a problem.
There are many great characters in the book, mostly women, as I said before. One of my favorites is Maya. She's a wonderful grandmother, generous, visionary, loving, courageous. She's just like me. I wonder where she got it.
She is like you.
I was the model for her. Where did you get this Maya Flores? She has also a Latin name, you know. And she's, of course, what I suspect, that she was one of those secondary characters that just pushed you over and took over.
She was less than secondary. She was a walk-on character in the early in the book. I swear to, I look back at it now and think, how in the world did I ever conceive of this book without her as a character? But she appears in the book in the first draft as a babysitter for young Julia, and slowly but surely. It sounds crazy when characters keep in, and authors say they talk to characters, and the characters talk to their authors. But I kept seeing ways in which it made sense for her to have more of a role in the book. And by the time I was through, she probably has a central role in the book.
Yeah, she's very important.
So she's the only character that brings together all the pieces in one person. And you know, I don't recommend this as a way of writing a book. You really ought to sit down and sketch out know all this in advance. But it just went off in its own direction. That's why it took 5 years.
You want to write a good book, you surrender. You have an idea, and then you let the characters do whatever they have to do. You try to control everything like a good male. I sit down on January 8th and I don't have an idea of what I'm going to do. I just sit down and let things happen. Open a vein. The most important character in any book, but especially in a thriller, is the villain, of course.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote a book called Sorrow, and sorrow is very important. It's the villain who makes sorrow be sorrow. So we need the villain. And in your book, evil is represented by an international criminal and his gang of young, unemployed, violent, neo-Nazi men named Patria. Patria means fatherland, a word that I really fear because in the name of Patria, atrocities were committed in Chile and in many other places in the world. So it's a very well-chosen name. What can you tell us about the villains without giving away the ending?
Yeah, there were times when I was writing the book when I sort of felt sorry for him a little bit.
You did.
There were the times when I kind of identified with him because I ended up creating a character who was pretty articulate about his villainy. He wasn't so articulate about what drove him to do things, but he was a perceptive character, so he knew where the power was in the world. and he was pretty contemptuous of everyone else who attempted to be a villain of his level. He loves being sole villain. He doesn't share his villainy well with others.
And it's true, he's very articulate. He knows exactly where the target is,
Yeah.
and never hesitates. It is really interesting. In the circle of, this will be the last question so we can talk with the audience. In the circle of 13, there are important messages and warnings. What would you like your readers to take with them after they read your pages?
Oh Lord, I just want them to be happy and have enjoyed the story, but I'm not sure that I have any particular message to other than, I guess, I don't know, be careful of misogyny, because it kills.
Yeah, I know one should not be preachy at all, but unavoidably, in your book, you're not preaching, but you see the warnings. It's like red lights that are flashing. And what would you say those are?
Well, I think I start out with an act of domestic violence in 2008, and that domestic violence kind of derived from the war injuries that the man had. The violence of the war leads over to domestic violence, which passes on the violence to his children, to his child, and later becomes an act of violence that kind of perpetuates itself throughout the entire book. I guess the message of the book is that violence breeds more violence, and you can never tell exactly where the ripples of it will end.
Yeah, that's true in the book and probably true in life.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, we can get some questions from the audience. Yes, over there.
Are you going to tour locally to other bookstores?
I am. I am.
Just a second, Elaine wants to say something.
You have to repeat the question. There are people all the way up there.
Oh my God. Okay.
Nobody has ever
Hi,
said
people
that
in
they
the
cannot
cafe.
understand.
The question is, am I going to tour to other local bookstores? Yes, I'm going down to Books Inc. I'm going up to Avid Reader in Davis. I'm going to Bookshop Santa Cruz. Where else am I going? I can't even remember now.
I'm amazed at
There are going a few outside of the area. Then we're up to Powell's in Portland.
And Elaine will allow all this?
Well, you know, this is I set out when I created the website for my book. I thought about it. Certainly wasn't going to link everybody to Amazon. That's what a lot of other authors do, and that's just crazy. But I decided really I didn't want to link everybody here either. I want to get as many bookstores involved as I can. So if you look on my website, you'll see about 40 different bookstores listed as places where you can buy the book. And all of them were happy to participate. I can't go to all 40 of them, but I'm going to a lot of them. Anyway, thank you for asking that.
Other questions? Yes. Yeah.
I was curious, since you've set this out in the future so much, if you put an embargo on listening to the news of today to kind of allow you to
Well, yeah, that's a good question. She wanted to know since I said it in the future, did I put an embargo on listening to the news of the day so I didn't get rattled by it? I didn't, but I probably should have, because over the course of 5 or 6 years, some of the things I was talking about that would be set off in the future happened. Yeah. Like, for example, the New York subway system being flooded by a hurricane, or wildfires in Arizona that burned down a lot of houses. I can think of Elaine and I, every now and then would look at each other and say, "Oh my God, history's catching up with you. We got to get the book published because I'm going to think about it." I mean, even the Occupy movement. I looked at that and I thought, okay, someone's going to look at the social action movements, the activists in this book, and think I got the inspiration from the Occupy movement. I love the Occupy movement. I thought that was a wonderful thing. But the idea of confrontational democracy was something that just popped into my head a couple of years before that. I'm glad to see some of these things occur, but it kind of interfered with my perception of the book. It's really pretty funny.
Yes. I have a personal interest in this, but where would you like to see your book shelved?
Excellent question.
Sci-fi.
It's okay. I think it's General fiction, how's that?
General fiction.
It's partially mystery, partially future fiction, partially, I don't know what. But I knew when I was writing the book that I was crossing genres on this thing. And I also know as a bookseller that's death. Because publishers and everyone else are booksellers. And everyone who sets the thing up has a computerized system, and they want to know where everything's going to go. And that's one of the reasons that, it's difficult to publish a book like this. My friend Carol C.J., who's here in the audience, once described this as as a novel of ideas, and which I thought was great. But her second sentence was, and publishers don't like to publish novels. And it's true, they don't know where to put them, so I don't know.
How about
Put it anywhere you like, put it anywhere you
I'll
want.
put them
Janelle
in
works
at
for
least
us.
3 sections.
There you go. Thank you.
They're on the table.
I think that it is obviously a thriller.
I've known you for a long time. You're a very smart, intellectual, wonderful guy. What the hell took you so long?
I was ready to go, I thought, about a year or so ago. But the editors and the publishers didn't think so, and they were right. Every time, one of the things anybody's writing a novel here, if you ever get rejected by a publisher, I learned the trick is to go back and rewrite the book, and that way the next time around you can tell yourself, this book hasn't been rejected. It was the last version of the book. And of course, you'd reject that because this one is much better.
20 years ago.
I should have started 20 years ago. I've known Willie forever.
How fully did you have to imagine the 70 years from now till 2082? And can you tell us how Ted Cruz does in 2032 in the election?
I try to avoid, I try to do it in packets. How fully did I visualize the future over the next 70 years? And the answer is not very fully at all. I tried to visualize it in packets. There's a sequence of the scenes in the 2030s and another in the 2040s, the 2050s, and the 2080s. And I tried to keep each scene each era kind of distinctive in my mind, with some connection between them, but not so much that I wanted to say, okay, it wasn't sort of a then this, then this, then this, then this. The book is structured, by the way, in a way that's I kind of copied the structure of a novel that I really liked from years back, called Small Death in Lisbon by Robert Wilson, where there's one narrative stream that goes along over a period of 2 weeks, but there's another narrative stream that goes back about 60 or 70 years, and it gradually catches up with the current narrative. I couldn't have done it just one event after another, doing it completely sequentially. It just wouldn't have worked. It couldn't have been a thriller. The tension would have evaporated immediately.
Yes. Yeah. They're calling her you.
Oh, okay. Well, you and I have talked about this before. I read it about a year ago or whenever this came out in the unabridged edition, and I've read it 3 times since. And the question I've had of myself.
It's more than I've read it.
The question I've had of myself, after conversations with you about action, like with Amazon, remember way back when we said that Amazon should change? Well, I asked myself over and over, what does this mean? And I think each of us does a different thing, and I came up with an answer which is so trite. I think from reading your book it just means one thing, and one thing only: we have to act. No matter what, no matter when, we just simply have to act.
Well, thanks, Colin. I just basically this is my friend Conlon who just basically made a comment that she's calling. Well, she's can't repeat it very well. That she looks at the book as a call to action. I suppose that may be it. I don't have it. It's not specifically in that direction. But one of the themes of the book is the 13 characters. The 13 are social activists, and they're basically a group of no-nonsense women who sit down and see a problem and they move on it, and they organize, and they pay a price for it. But I guess that there's a moral of the story is that we need more people like them.
Yes, in the back, the gentleman there.
Let's talk about Amazon. How important is Amazon to the success of your book?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. My publisher, I know, has done some things with them. And I said, look, as a bookseller, I don't want to know what you're doing particularly. I know that they'll probably have a fair amount of sales. At least I hope so. It's an important part of the business. I don't feel like I need to direct any sales in that direction. And they'd probably be more surprised if I did that. So I'm not going to do that.
He has a question?
Good afternoon. Thank
Hi.
you. Hi. So the book is a call to action, and both of you being particularly interested in people reading books and literature, you're making the rounds to bookstores. Have you thought about taking the message out to others who may not go to the bookstore to hear this call to action? And if you have and you need some help, can I help?
Joe wants to know if he can help in a call to action around the country. I don't want to make too much of the idea of a call to action. I just want to get people to read the book and hopefully enjoy it and maybe think a little bit about some of the ideas in there. But if it leads to action, if it leads to social, people being energized in a positive direction, I'd be very, very happy, and I'll do anything I can.
Well, should that altruism come out and you need to put that call out?
You'll be the first I call.
Thank you.
Get this man's email,
Immediately.
phone number, personal address.
Okay, we'll take one more question. You, the lady there. Yeah.
How much research did you do into cutting edge technologies like what's happening right now with holograms and what's happening with person robots and so on?
Not much. The question was how much research did I do on cutting edge technology? I have to say I didn't do too much, other than to just look at stuff that's current information that we have and trying to project how it would be in the future. I think I did more research on some of the social issues and the projection of those. I just had to kind of direct more of my energies there towards that. The technology became an essential part of the story because technology changes and you can't recreate a world in a future decade without some changes in technology. But I didn't want to let the technology take over the story. I have Toki, the house robot, walking around, and Julia's kind of bemused with him, kind of wondering how clueless he can be as a robot. And I guess that's maybe an issue in itself. How will we treat house robots in the future? She kind of treats him kind of like it's a joke, but maybe that's not the right way of doing it. I don't know.
There may be a robot revolution when they
Maybe there's a robot revolution, and we need to be behave better towards them.
Thank you very, very much. You've been a wonderful